Hey, it's Dr. Trussell again. I'm going to want to look at the high points, the main points of Chapter 4 of Giancola's book, Program Evaluation, Embedding Evaluation into Program Design and Development. In Chapter 4, we walk through several different evaluation ideologies and approaches. So your ideology has to do with how you think about evaluation in general, and this chapter introduces several calibrators or continuum along which one might find themselves. So I find these really useful as a way or a tool for thinking about your own evaluation ideology. So the first couple are design calibrators. How do you feel or what do you think about the design of an evaluation? And at one extreme on the design structure calibrator is the medical model of research, and at the other extreme is the anthropological model of research. The important questions there being, to what extent can and should evaluation be conducted in a controlled environment using research designs closely aligned to the medical model? And to what extent can and should evaluation be conducted in natural settings, a lot like research designs used in anthropological research? So do we do our very best to control things, thereby giving up some of the applicability to a real-world sort of scenario? Or do we study things in their real-world setting and give up some of our control and our ability to then learn from what we've studied and generalize to other scenarios? So that's the design structure calibrator. There's the design purpose calibrator, which relates to the process and intent of the evaluation. So the two ends here are pure design, not making any changes to the program during the evaluation, or the other extreme is a continuous program improvement, so that as you're evaluating, you're also changing things to make them better. So your main questions here, in what ways do mid-evaluation programs changes affect the interpretability of findings? In what ways do those mid-evaluation program changes affect the replicability of the program? But then, to what extent should a program make adjustments during an evaluation based on formative data? And in what ways should formative evaluation be used during an evaluation to improve a program? So again, when we look at these calibrators, these design ones, and then we'll look at some others in the next couple of slides, there's not a right or a wrong end to this. These are ideologies. These are ways of thinking about evaluation, and you might find yourself closer to one end than the other. Most likely, most of us find ourselves somewhere in the middle between the two extremes. And honestly, what you end up doing in terms of your evaluation approach and design could depend not only on your own ideology, but also on the resources that you have and your ability to conduct particular types of evaluations. So don't think about these as rights or wrongs or goods or bads. They're just different ways of approaching evaluation, and each calibrator has two extremes, and then most folks fall somewhere in between those two extremes. It's really a continuum. So those were design calibrators. Next is a role calibrator that has to do with the role that the evaluator will play. So the first, R1, first role calibrator, is evaluator involvement. So what role and relationship should an evaluator have with program staff? To what extent should that evaluator keep firm boundaries between the evaluation and the program? What are the benefits and drawbacks to keeping those boundaries? To what extent should the evaluator be a full partner with the program staff in determining the direction of the program? So these are the two extremes of evaluator involvement. One is the evaluator is totally hands-off, completely third-party to the program and just observing and evaluating. And the other is this partnership model where the evaluator is working in an advisory capacity or working closely with program staff or somehow involved in the program as they are evaluating. So again, two ends of one continuum. And then the second role calibrator is evaluator responsibility. So what responsibility does the evaluator have to a program and to the organization within which that program is implemented? So the two extremes here are that evaluation can be an external activity with the evaluator's responsibility to come in, complete the evaluation, provide the report, and leave. Or on the other end of the spectrum, the evaluator might view evaluation as capacity building. And then they seek to build processes and facilitate data-driven practices that are still in place when the formal evaluation is complete. So they don't just leave behind a report and go. They leave maybe a report, but also they leave these practices and evaluation skills, data-driven practices that they've sort of built into the program now that they've left. So how involved are you with the program? Do you make any changes to the program or not as a result of your evaluation? And then the big questions here for evaluator responsibility are: to what extent should an evaluation be external or peripheral to the program? And to what extent should evaluators collect the data necessary for the evaluation without interfering with the program process? How much should an evaluation try to change program processes to incorporate data collection as an ongoing process? And in what ways can and to what extent should evaluators build structures into programs to facilitate reliance on data by program staff? Again, no right or wrong, two ends of a continuum. Next, we have methods calibrators. So we have data collection methods and methods focus. So the first one, data collection methods. Most evaluators see the usefulness of employing mixed methods using both quantitative and qualitative methods in evaluation. But those are the two extremes of this calibrator, quantitative and qualitative. So quantitative lets you get more information more quickly from more individuals, can analyze them pretty quickly. Qualitative data, not as quick, not as simple, not as clean, but often has a level of detail that just sticking to the numbers can't provide. So qualitative data can be used to illuminate quantitative findings. We've got numbers, but we don't understand the story behind that, and we can use qualitative data to help us understand where the numbers come from. So typically here we get somewhere in between the two ends of the continuum, not fully quantitative and not fully qualitative, but these are two ends of this continuum here for evaluation. The second is the second calibrator for methods is methods focus. So another consideration: how do we focus our evaluation? At the heart here is whether evaluation designs should be constrained by program goals. So we have objectives-oriented evaluation, which is an approach to evaluation where the focus of the evaluation is on how well the program meets a set of predetermined objectives. And on the other hand, we have goal-free evaluation, which is where the evaluation is not constrained by program goals, but simply looks at and measures the outcomes, whether they're intended or unintended. So we're not sort of constrained to looking at the goals we had when we first designed the program, but instead we look more broadly at all of the outcomes that are occurring, whether we intended them to or not. So those are the two extremes of the methods focus. And this figure just shows how all of these calibrators go into one's ideology. So wherever you fit on those method, design, and role calibrators determine what your ideology is, or how you think about evaluation, how you approach evaluation, and that will affect your evaluation design and your evaluation approach. But the things that also affect the design and approach are the resources you have and the context and environment in which you are conducting your design. So even if you are really believe in the numbers, so you're maybe a quantitative researcher at the heart, but you go into a situation where no one has collected any data, you may have to start with some qualitative methods to start hearing stories and learning about what a program is doing if you don't have the numbers to start with. That's just one example of a time when your resources or your context may come to bear on your evaluation design and may cause you to, veer a little bit on some of those calibrators from where you might ideally land, according to your ideology. Your approach also to your design will be affected by your ideology, but also by the skills that you have, whether you're able, skilled in the areas of evaluation that would be needed, and how much access you have to your stakeholders to be able to ask questions and get answers. So all of these things sort of influence each other. Ideology is important, but it's not the end-all be-all. You may have your ideal. Here's what if I could design the ideal evaluation, here's what it would look like. But then in reality, you walk into a situation that's already got a certain set of resources and a certain context, then you have to work with what you've got within your own skills and with the people that you're able to contact. So ideology certainly influences design and approach. So then we switch gears and we look at design. So different designs for evaluation, and your author here lists some individuals who've been influential under each of the evaluation designs. I like I do with every chapter, I encourage you to go and read the text and read about some of the work of these scholars who have helped to develop the field of evaluation. So the first, these are not in any particular order, but the first design, evaluation design, is experimental design. So experimental design is where you use random assignment of subjects, and you have a program or intervention that is administered to one group, and you have a control group that is not participating or benefiting from the program or intervention, and you then can compare results. So you've created an experiment with random assignment. So this is the gold standard for being able to determine causality, whether your program causes certain outcomes or not. If you can create two groups that are identical, other than the fact that the program has been administered with one group and not the other, then you know that any differences you see in the group will be because of the program, not some other confounding factor. So this is experimental design, which is, again, the gold standard, but often not realistic in the real world. A lot of times we end up with what's called a quasi-experimental design, where we sort of design an experiment. We have a control group, but we don't have random assignment. A lot of reasons we might do this as opposed to a truly experimental design, not least of which ethics. So if you have an intervention or a program that you believe to be especially helpful, it may be unethical or difficult to withhold that from one group so that you can study the effects on the other group. And so you may design your program in such a way that you allow individuals, for example, there's more than one way to do this, but one example of a way to design a quasi-experimental design is you let folks choose whether to be in the program or not. And then you look at the outcomes for those who are in the program versus those who are not in the program. This is not as perfect as randomly assigning because there probably are differences between the types of people who choose to be in the program and the types of people who choose not to be in the program. And those differences may not be results of the program itself. So when you measure a difference between the groups, you're not really sure whether the program caused that difference or whether that difference existed before, right? So that's what you sort of give up when you go from random assignment to non-random assignment. But sometimes, like I said, and actually many times, random assignment, just though it's the gold standard, isn't practical or possible or ethical. So we go with a quasi-experimental design. Last, you've got non-experimental designs where you don't have a control group at all. And or you have a really poor control or comparison group. Much weaker designs, you're not able to determine causality really in any way. But it's sometimes it's the best you can do. And if it's the best you can do, what you just look at the program you've got and you look at the outcomes for the individuals who are in that program. So the individual here, Bamberger, has done a lot of work to develop a methodologically rigorous non-experimental design. So it is possible to do good research that's non-experimental, even though it's not sort of the ideal. So those are evaluation designs. We've looked at evaluation ideology, which affects how we design a program. And then once we've designed it, how do we approach implementation, right? So evaluation approaches. One is that we could be objectives oriented. So we talked about this a few slides back, which is where we measure what a program is doing against its intended goals, right? And sort of the opposite of that, or in contrast to that, there's goal-free evaluation, where we just want to look at everything the program's doing, regardless of what we intended it for it to do. So we look at the intended and unintended consequences or outcomes from a program. That's goal-free evaluation. Then there's theory-based evaluation, which is similar to outcome-based evaluation. So it explicitly looks at what a program does, relates that to its intended outcomes based on the logic of why and how a program works. So based on the theory of why we built the program the way we did and expected the outcomes we expected, how are we doing? So that's a theory-based evaluation. There's a responsive evaluation, which focuses on what the program does rather than its intended outcomes. It's responsive to stakeholder needs for information and acknowledges multiple perspectives in reporting findings. So this is more like the goal-free evaluation. We're looking at everything that we do, not specifically related to our outcomes, but it's responsive in a sense that it really considers who we're performing the evaluation for. What do our stakeholders need from us out of this evaluation? How can we take into consideration multiple perspectives as we report our findings, and be sure that we respond to what it is our stakeholders need. The SIP approach to evaluation includes 4 types of evaluation, all wrapped up in one, and the CIPP stand for these 4. So one is context, relates to the program's needs and contextual conditions. Input relates to the planning of activities that are part of the program. Process evaluation relates to the implementation of those activities. And then product evaluation looks at the intended and unintended consequences of the program. Utilization-focused evaluation. It's a collaborative approach to evaluation in which the evaluator prioritizes perspectives and values of those who will be most affected by the evaluation findings. We want to make sure that the evaluation we're performing is one that can be used, can be useful in implementation or in improving programs. Participatory evaluation is sort of what it sounds like. So this is where stakeholders are involved in the evaluation process. They're considered partners with the evaluators and engaged in all aspects of the program, from design to data collection to analysis and reporting. So a focused group of stakeholders work really closely with the evaluator in this partnership, and so that by the time the evaluator is done, the evaluator has sort of engaged in capacity building so that stakeholders are now able to conduct their own evaluations in the future once the evaluator is gone. Empowerment evaluation actually looks at doing just that, making sure that that the stakeholders are empowered to use the evaluation findings and to conduct their own evaluations. So very similar to the participatory evaluation approach. I suppose one could use an empowerment evaluation that's not participatory and just has a lot of teaching involved, but probably one of the better ways to empower the stakeholders is to have them participate in the process. So the two probably related and possibly hand in hand. Last, and what most of this book focuses on, as you can tell from the subtitle of the textbook, is embedded evaluation. So this is an evaluation process. We've encountered this before, back in chapter 1, I believe, where this is an evaluation process based on continuous improvement. Uses an evaluation matrix to facilitate the development of indicators, things that we'll be looking at, guiding our data collection and our analysis. Uses elements from participatory evaluation approach so that those who are involved in implementing the program are capable then of evaluating on a continuous basis as they implement. And so we evaluate and we improve, and we reevaluate and we improve, just sort of constantly as part of implementing. We're collecting data and we're analyzing data, and we're looking at our outcomes and making changes as necessary to those outcomes. So this is embedded evaluation, and this is sort of where the book goes from here, is more about embedded evaluation.